So obviously, we're always on the lookout for new Christian media, specifically biblical media that is really amazing, high budget, well written, well done. And recently we got this big kind of movie from Netflix called Mary. Of course, this is about Mother Mary and kind of her life from birth up until the birth of Jesus and kind of what happens there. This was a very interesting movie. I sat down for the whole 2 hours, watched the entire thing, and took notes along the entire way. Now, there is a lot, like so much that I could talk about when it comes to this movie. I am not going to sit here for the next 4 hours and break down everything that could be broken down about this movie because I think that I would go insane. So what I decided to do instead was to take my top 5 things about this movie that are, let's just say not so great, and tell you about those 5 things overall. So first things first, let's just talk about the overall movie. What is this and what can you expect to kind of see? Well, overall, this movie is what it says that it is. It's a movie about Mary that starts off in her birth, basically, before she was born, actually, and then it ends up basically right after the birth of Jesus and everything that happens there. If I go to this frame right here, you can kind of tell this isn't a normal Christmas story, right? There are a lot of things that are very, very different. And why is that? Well, number one on my top 5 of why Mary is the way that it is just the fact of what the source material was for this movie. The source material for Mary was not necessarily the scriptures. It was a lot of different things that were kind of mushed together and then ignored slightly and then sort of mushed together some more. There's a lot of things that really did not fit in the way that it should, especially historically, culturally, and especially biblically. The source material for this is something called the Proto-Evangelium of James. And this is basically, Proto-Evangelium means first gospel or first good news, right? And basically, this is the book of James that is the brother of Jesus. And this is a traditional sort of Catholic, not canonical book, but a book that is seen as something to give insight into the early years of Jesus and the early years of Mary, even before she was born. The whole idea of this is that Mary is not necessarily who we see her to be in Scripture, but that Mary's father, right here, actually appealed to God as well as her mother, and they basically reached out to God and they were like, hey, we're old and we're really wanting a child. Will you give us a child? And God basically said, yes, he'll give them a child, but they're going to have to return that child to service to the temple when she's a little bit older, and that child will be a special child, essentially. So Mary was almost a miraculous birth. Now, we don't see this at all in Scripture. We have no evidence of this except for from the Proto-Evangelium of James. And so that's basically where the source material is coming from. So the whole idea is that her dad and mom pray for this child. They have the child, but then after Mary is born, this is Mary right here. After Mary is born, her mother and her father have to give her up into service for the temple, which is what happens here. So the temple basically takes Mary and they have to give her up, and she is in service to the temple somehow. This doesn't really make sense to me historically. There wasn't like a group of women, like a nunnery almost, that served the temple. It just didn't exist. The priests were the ones who served the temple. The priests were the ones that kind of made this all happen. And so it doesn't really make sense for this to take place in the way that it does. Now, let's talk about the Proto-Evangelium of James. Why is this not part of the canon? Why do we not have this as part of our Bible? Well, the truth is that this is most likely a Gnostic writing that is not accurate. And I know some people are going to dislike that I said that. Some of the Catholic folks that maybe have this as something that they hold on to may not like that. But the truth is that, like, in terms of biblical scholars, most of them will say that this is something that is not really to be trusted, as it was written way later. We have no idea who the author was. It says that it's written by James, the brother of Jesus. However, we know that it was written during the 2nd century, so it cannot be written by James. This is written basically 120 years or more after the death and ascension of Jesus, death, resurrection, and ascension. So it really does not fit that this could be from the brother of Jesus. It just doesn't make sense. So that's my first note, is the source material is really off. There's a lot of things within the Proto-Evangelium of James that don't really make sense, and they don't fit with the Bible, which is why it's not part of our canon, which is why it's not seen as a book to be kind of studied and looked over within the realm of Christianity. That's number one. Number two is a fun one as well. This one, this one is quite interesting. If we look at this scene here, you're going to see a couple of different figures that kind of happen throughout this story. So really from the beginning of the story throughout this whole life of Mary, we see these forces fighting back and forth. So this right here is actually Lucifer. This is Satan, or they call him the demon at some different points, but he's called Lucifer here, which means that he is Satan himself, right? And so we see as well, this other person is Gabriel. So Gabriel is a constant character within the show as well. He is kind of this force that almost really makes the story happen throughout the entire thing. For example, there's one point when Joseph is not going to run into Mary, and then he kind of says, hey, go this way instead. And then he goes and he finally runs into Mary, right? Gabriel is also the one who essentially delivers all the messages to Mary's father and mother, or to even Herod the Great at the end of the movie. He says, your time is almost at an end. And he appears to Herod the Great and like proclaims that to him as well. There's a lot of things that are just like super strange about this whole situation here. They have like this weird angel fight right next to Mary where they're like vibrating each other. I don't know what is going on here. But it's very weird, very strange there. So that is number two, is Lucifer and Gabriel. Gabriel's kind of role throughout the entire movie is very strange. It's very weird. Definitely nothing that we can see biblical there. Very weird. Moving on to number three is my favorite thing in the whole wide world, and that, of course, is the timeline. Now, if we look at the timeline of the whole situation here, we see a couple of different things that are happening, and that is that it's just wrong. I mean, it's just really wrong. Like, there's so many things here that are just like horribly in the wrong spot, or they are kind of like adding things where they shouldn't, or there's different things. Obviously, the whole thing about Mary being in like this class of servants to the priests is super weird. But the timeline itself is just off. It's very strange the way that they've decided to put things in certain places or change things around. For example, like Herod ends up killing his wife in this one, Mariamne, I think is her name, Mariamne. And that does happen in real life, but it happens in a completely different time at a completely different place for a completely different reason. He ends up killing her and her two sons later on. Of course, Herod killed a lot of different people. But there's a lot of things that are just really strange. Like, he blinds the priest in front of Mary, and then Mary has this moment of like, almost like she is, I'll show you here. Like, she's almost like mind controlling Herod, and he's having like this really like weird flash forward to Jesus being crucified. Just super crazy, weird stuff here where she's like, almost has like this power over him. It's very strange. Okay. So anyway, we'll get off of that. Number 4 here is at the end of the movie. At the end of the movie, this happens. Okay. So they have this huge fight where Joseph like kills all the Romans and like they're able to escape. Okay. There's this big fight that happens. Mary kind of girl bosses her way onto this horse, and she has Jesus in a sling in front of her, and she tells Joseph to get on so they can get out of here. This family that was hiding them, by the way, the Romans just come in and kill them, and like it's not a big deal. Like, they just run away and leave them there to die. So Mary and Joseph run with the horse through the fire. Of course, they're action heroes here. And as they go through this fire and do all this stuff, they run away and they run away and they run away. And the whole point of this is that they've been running away from the Romans, trying to get away from Herod, killing all the babies, which we're going to talk about as number 5 in a second here. And so they finally get away. They finally run away. They finally are escaping, and they get out. But then what happens right here is Mary stops them in the middle of the river and says, "We should go back to Jerusalem." Real quick before we continue into this madness, I wanted to remind you about our Patreon. For $5, $10, or $25 a month, you can join our community over there and see all the extra content that we post behind the scenes from The Chosen or these other projects, and our full live streams every single week. If you're interested, click the link in the description down below and we'll see you over there. Oh my gosh. So at this moment right here, she goes, they finally escape, right? They're finally going to go to Egypt, which is what happens in scripture, okay? They're like, we're going to run away to Egypt. And this is great as well. Instead of like God telling Joseph that he's supposed to run away because there's danger coming, a random guy just shows up and says, "You guys have to leave. You guys got to get out of here because danger's coming." And so they get to this spot in the river after escaping everything, after surviving, after throwing Jesus off of a roof. Yes, throwing Jesus off of a burning roof. They finally escape and they're finally away. And then Mary's like, "Yeah, we should go back to the temple." And so that's what they do. They decide, nobody can touch us because we're blessed. It's not a big deal. Right here, she says, he says we're hunted, and she says we're blessed. And then, and then they just go back, and nobody hurts them. In fact, Herod kind of like dies or something. Like, it's very strange. This is Herod, surrounded by newborns, by the way, which we'll talk about in a second. And they just kind of go back. Nobody hurts them. Nobody stops them. Super, super strange there. Last thing is Herod the Great. Herod the Great, played by Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins is fine. He has a British accent, which you know how we feel about that really in the whole understanding of this. Like, Herod is not, I don't know, it's just strange to me. At this point in the movie, I'm like exhausted, right? By the time we get to this point, I am so exhausted. Like, I literally am like writing pages and pages of notes for this movie. And I get to this point and Herod goes, Herod, first of all, the wise men come during the birth of Jesus, which of course is part of the nativity, but it's not part of history. It's not part of reality. The wise men don't come until Jesus is a little child, a toddler, essentially. And so Jesus, that whole thing happens like with Herod and the wise men and everything else. That doesn't happen until Jesus is a toddler. And so Herod doesn't go to kill all the babies until much later, right? But in this story, the wise men all come during the same time that the shepherds come and everything like that. And then Herod as well decides that he is going to kill all the newborns, all the toddler males, right? All the young males in the city of Bethlehem. That's what he decides he's going to do. And then right after that, like a few minutes later, he decides, okay, I want you to kill all the males, all the young males in the city of Bethlehem, but then I want you to find the Christ child and bring him to me alive. Like, I don't understand. Like, what the whole point of the killing of the children is to kill the Christ child, is to kill this so-called king of the Jews, right? So then he says, he goes, "Go kill all these kids, but then bring me the one that I want to kill alive." I don't know, bro. I gave up at that point, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is maybe the worst written biblical movie I've ever seen. And that is really hard to do. Like, really, really hard to do. So Herod then basically ends up dying. Like, he just like kind of, he's chilling there. I don't know. It's very strange. Oh yeah, by the way, Jesus has like 1 million followers that come and watch his birth, by the way, because here's a bonus one for you. The people didn't come to Bethlehem just for the census. They came because they heard that Jesus was going to be born in Bethlehem. So there were thousands of people that showed up in Bethlehem to watch Jesus be born, by the way. Okay. That is it for me and the Mary movie. My brain is about to explode, as you can tell. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Did you watch this movie? Was it an interesting watch for you? Because for me, it was really hard. Anyway, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.